Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, and we are gathering once more to talk about Dragon Age, but not the one that's coming out today. We're actually talking about the one that came out like 15 years ago. We talked about Dragon Age the Veilguard a few days ago. If you haven't checked that out, the review's out now. It's done stupid well, and I'm really thankful for those of you who showed out for that video. I think it hit like number 3 on trending, so just thank you for being a part of that. I was super proud of the review, and I'm happy to see how well it did. We've gained like 5,000 new subscribers since that video went live, so if you're new here, welcome. We just like to talk about video games here, and we're going to do just that in an admittedly Retro Rebound coded video. Normally these sorts of retrospective videos go up on that channel, but after Starfield came out, we did do a revisit for the Outer Worlds, and I thought it put a lot of things into perspective. And I wanted to do a very similar thing here with Dragon Age Origins after Dragon Age the Veilguard. So let's do that. But first, ladies and gentlemen, a quick word from today's sponsor. The following video is brought to you by Kabam. Today we're taking a look at the latest game from Kabam. They're the creators of Marvel Contest of Champions and Disney Mirrorverse. This is King Arthur Legends Rise, and it's the latest trailer for the game. It's a, you know this is Matty's favorite, all-new turn-based collection RPG. We love that here. Featuring an immersive story and expansive exploration set in a stunning reimagined Arthurian world. Players are going to be able to adventure through Camelot with an ever-growing squad of knights, mages, and rogues to battle epic bosses and mythical monsters with visually stunning combat. Perhaps best of all is that you can dive into this adventure with crossplay, where you can travel through the kingdom of Camelot to take on Arthurian quests, forge mythical weapons, and meet exciting heroes and legends. Pre-registration is available for this game right now, so become the leader of the legendary nation of Camelot in King Arthur Legends Rise. Click the link in my description to pre-register today and keep up to date on this amazing launch reward. So yeah, it goes without saying that after playing Dragon Age the Veilguard, I felt I needed a touch of soul cleansing, and this video really isn't designed to dunk on Veilguard, but more so again to provide context, reflect, compare, and contrast, because I really view Dragon Age Origins more and more as time goes on as this anomaly at BioWare. Not in the terms of quality, but really in the type of game it is. BioWare, outside of Dragon Age Origins, has been an action RPG studio for like 20 years. When you look at it, they really dropped a lot of the turn-based or real-time strategy stuff around 2005 with Jade Empire. That was the beginning of a new BioWare. Then you had Mass Effect afterwards, and they were on a completely different trajectory. But in the middle of all of that, plus the Mass Effect sequels and whatnot, Anthem, you had Dragon Age Origins in 2009, which was a return to form with the kind of older spirit of BioWare, if you will. But since then, there's been nothing like that. And before that, for many years, there wasn't anything like that outside of my favorite game of all time, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I think it just shows with people clamoring so much for that older type of BioWare to come back, and in terms of gameplay and dialogue selection specifically, which we'll get into in a little bit, that it just shows how much these games have stood the test of time. Now, I've been playing Dragon Age Origins since like May of this year, just randomly picking it up here or there, chipping through it, because as I've mentioned before, leading into the launch of Veilguard, I was kind of excited because I do like Dragon Age a lot, and so I wanted to get all of those playthroughs done before the game came out. I failed epically on that, and honestly, if I did succeed on that, I think my disappointment would have been much, much, much higher after playing the Veilguard. But really, we got to talk about a lot of things that I think BioWare has gotten away from over the years that I think would benefit them a lot if they went back to it. I look at kind of what Bethesda Game Studios did with Starfield. I know many people view that as a train wreck, but Bethesda Game Studios did go back to a lot of what made them great. With Starfield, I just think the execution on exploration was not good. But when it came to like the presentation of dialogue and just being able to read your options and decide what you want to say and having characters properly react to that, that is something that people wanted from a BGS game. And man, oh man, do people really want it from a BioWare game. And I sure do too. One thing I was really frustrated with in Veilguard is when I would select dialogue options and you just wouldn't say the thing that you thought your character was going to say and the world wouldn't react to it properly. Whereas in something like Origins, I love this because it was introduced to me with Knights of the Old Republic, where you just see it fully laid out. Like, this is the entire sentence. This is what you're going to say. And it gives you more room for player expression, not just in like they can just give you a list of options instead of little quips in a dialogue wheel, but also it's just the breadth of the sentence. Like, you can be brief and the character will maybe acknowledge that, like, wow, you don't have much to say, or you can say nothing at all. Like, sometimes that option is available. It's not always just what I think people look at in the bigger picture of like good and evil. It's player expression, and I think Origins does an amazing job of that. Of course, with the origin story, I mean, being able to create your own character, that origin story, it can get really messed up in some of them, especially like the elves and the alien age. It's really screwy there, but that sort of decision you make in the very early of the game defines how characters will react to you, how they'll speak to you, choices that'll be available to you. And it's that latter part that I think really defines Origins, and I think Veilguard was set up for it. Veilguard has that similar Origins feel in its story of like, we're building up to this big threat and we need to be ready for it. And a lot of Veilguard is spent working on relationships with people as well as factions. Just the way you gain factions loyalty, for example, is completing side quests in a zone, whereas something like Origins does my favorite style of storytelling. Again, you're hearing the word favorite a lot, so I am a little biased here, but Origins does let you go from zone to zone and you make a choice at the end of that zone. So each zone effectively has its own story that's playing into the overarching main narrative, and these choices are going to affect the outcome at the end of the game. I always loved the choice between like the elves and the werewolves. I thought that was like really cruel and dark and twisted, and that is what BioWare has done so well. And that's why the finale for Veilguard twisted me up a little bit, because it is pretty good compared to the rest of the game, but even standing on its own, I definitely think it's respectable. It's not comparable to something like Mass Effect 2's ending, don't get it twisted, but I think it's good enough. That said, why it's good is because it has the choice that the rest of the game is missing, whereas Origins has every single arc in every single zone with a big choice at the end of it. So you get to face that moment over and over, and it's such an empowering feeling as a player, just having agency over how these different areas are going to go, and obviously knowing that you're not only changing those relationships, but who's going to show up in that final fight. But for those who don't know, in a post-Fallout 4 world, there was a lot of debating. What's better, Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas? And I was always a Fallout 3 guy. Why is that? Yeah, New Vegas is better written. Yeah, New Vegas has better choice. But tone and atmosphere do so much for me in games that Fallout 3 always won my heart. And I also thought it was a pretty well-written game itself with good choice. But ladies and gentlemen, that is what I think makes Origins so different, tone and atmosphere. The soundtrack is composed by Einon Zur, and he's just a wonderful talent. He's worked on, I just spoke about Fallout 3, he worked on that. He's worked on so many great games, and he just has a soundscape that's immediately recognizable and is so fitting for Dragon Age. And this is one of my critiques of Veilguard, is there are some things in the game that I think if you're being just objective looking at it without the context of the series, you go, that's good. Like some of the tracks in Veilguard are actually really good, but they just don't fit the vibe of the series or sometimes even the scene, where something like Dragon Age Origins is very brooding, right? And you need that feel because you have the Darkspawn threat that's kind of emerging. You can feel a little bit of the Lord of the Rings energy, not only in the soundtrack, but the way the Darkspawn are presented. One of my favorite scenes in all of video games is absolutely when the war between all of these humans, all of these different races is about to break out against the Darkspawn, and they're lining up. It's got a Helm's Deep feel to it, and it is also the heart of one of gaming's greatest betrayals, I think, ever. That totally sets the plot up for you to get emotionally invested. But I think underlining all of that is this wonderful, bombastic, epic, brooding soundtrack. It really defines the locations you're in. If I mute my game and I run around like the Kakari Wilds in the beginning of Origins, it's kind of just a messy looking forest, but with that heavy type of music over on top of it, plus the enemies you're fighting, it really does add this whole layer for me that just elevates the experience completely. And it really does make me wonder with the response to Veilguard, if BioWare will ever take a chance at re-releasing some of these Dragon Age games. I do think it's a massive error for them to not be doing this. And it's one thing I'm going to continue to beat the war drum on. I'm begging you, BioWare, please bring these games back. The only thing is I worry about, in a world where like game developers are sometimes very focused on fixing things that don't need to be fixed. I say this as one myself. Like BioWare, I could totally see a world where they actually like tweak Origins too much and they leave Dragon Age Inquisition the same if they were to re-release that. And it's like, no, you got to do it the opposite way, man. Like just bring this one back as a timeless gem. But I also would love to see this re-released for a number of reasons. Number one, it's like locked down on EA Play. And honestly, this game crashes a lot for me on PC. It's great on Xbox back compat. It loads quickly there. It looks great there. I would love to see this game like handheld on Switch. Like I just feel there's a good reason to bring back Dragon Age. And I do feel like BioWare, whether they mean it or not, is creating this sort of scale between Dragon Age and Mass Effect that if you're a company, I mean, granted, as a fan, I feel this way where I like Mass Effect more than Dragon Age, but you are creating, I think, an imbalance like, oh, Mass Effect is more important to us than Dragon Age. I'm like, well, Inquisition sold like 12+ million copies. Why wouldn't you want to re-release like one of the oldest games in the series. I just feel it would do so much for them, like a Dragon Age Legendary Edition is what I've called it, where you bring back at least Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2. I mean, Inquisition admittedly is readily available, but imagine all these games brushed up a little bit on the visual front and just presented as is with some gameplay tweaks for quality of life enhancements. I can think of very few because I'm extremely biased in the hands of something like Origins, but when I think of like Inquisition, I could lay out like 6 different quality of life improvements that BioWare could do immediately. One of the first being just tweaking the economy of the war table. That would go so far for that game, and honestly make it possibly like right there neck and neck with Origins for me, just by nature of like the plot being really good in Dragon Age Inquisition and how it sets up souls and everything, plus a lot of the main quest and choices being there are great. It just takes a while to get to all of that. But Dragon Age Origins, I think the thing people struggle a lot with in this game is the combat. And all I can encourage you to do is don't be intimidated, man. Like, if you look at it and you go, that's just not my style game, no matter how good you say it is, I get it. But to me, if you've like played something such as Knights of the Old Republic, then you can handle something like this. Dragon Age Origins can be tough. Like, when you get swarmed by a lot of enemies early game, you can get bounced pretty quickly. There is a learning curve there, but you have great build crafting in who you pick to play as, not just in personality, but also the traits that come with that, the combat buffs that come with that, the skills you pick when leveling up. Again, if you've played KOTOR, you know this already, that it's a spiritual sequel, but there's a lot of building here. And also, I mean, look, I have talked about all this. I haven't even gotten to the characters. Going back to this game, I think this might be one of the best casts in gaming ever. I usually look at characters like Liliana and Morgan, and you look at how relevant they are throughout the entire series, Morgan especially, just one of the greatest characters potentially ever made. But they all start here in Origins. Alistair is extremely important, starts here in Origins. Like, those are the big 3 to me that always stand out in my head. One of the biggest shames with Origins is that they only gave Liliana like character-based DLC that filled in her backstory. Like, maybe my eyes are a bit bigger than my stomach because Dragon Age Origins got so much DLC. We'll talk about that in a sec, but I mean, imagine if like Morgan got her own DLC and Alistair and so on and so forth. I feel like there was a lot of room here, and it was different. Instead of playing as your character, you play as Liliana, and it brought you a little bit closer to her as a character. I mean, this was the game that was the first for me in a lot of different areas. It was my first HD TV game. I remember getting a Vizio 28-inch TV and firing up this game and being a dumbass and having standard definition cables plugged in and thinking the image looked awful and that the TV was broken. So I unplugged it for a couple weeks. My parents came in, they're like, why aren't you using the TV we got you for Christmas? And then they taught me that there are different inputs there. And so I got to play Dragon Age Origins in glorious high definition, and I was beyond happy. So that opened my mind to something. And then I played it again, and I downloaded DLC for the first time, and that was really cool for me. Like, the Return to Ostagar DLC blew my friggin' mind when I was younger, because it was already like such a massive emotional moment for the game's story. And to go back there and see like, what happened to my man Kalen? Like, I'll always remember being in complete denial, like, we're going to find him. We're going to find him and he's going to be okay. It's like, no, don't think so. So I do think that one thing isn't talked about enough with Origins, and that is its DLC and how good it is. I know some people are a little like in the middle on Awakening. Confession. Origins is one of my favorite games of all time. I've never played Awakening. What's wrong with me, man? Like, I'm so bad with DLC. There's a whole video I'm working on it for the holiday break, but yeah, like DLC has always been such a weak component for me in the terms of like picking it up. If like I don't get it at a very specific moment, I almost never get to it, as I'll highlight in that future video. But I do think Dragon Age Origins is a standout example for excellently done DLC. Like, you'll find new companions in it, new quest lines in it. And even if you remove Dragon Age the Veilguard from the entire conversation and just take a look at Dragon Age Origins on its own, I still think it's a bit of an anomaly compared to the rest of what BioWare has done, both a little bit before and especially after Dragon Age Origins. So it's just a very, very interesting video game to me on that level, but it's also just one that I think is worth studying, and how important dialogue selection is, how important writing quality is, and how it can very much carry a game's experience. I do feel like AAA game development, not just BioWare, but across the board, is undervaluing great writing, and that's why people, I think, get attached to characters in a game like Baldur's Gate. The motion capture was great, and the writing was phenomenal, and it built out the world through these characters. I think it's undermined because I think a lot of investors see explosions, big damage numbers, combat, excitement, flash, 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 and they think that's what sells, but people are seeing through this stuff. And so I just look at Dragon Age Origins more and more as this continuously fascinating game that still remains as one of my favorites of all time. And so now I'm going to wrap up this video and go play some more. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me know your thoughts on Dragon Age Origins after playing Veilguard, if you play it at all, down below. Curious to get your thoughts. Other than that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.